There is a moment, you will know it when it comes, and perhaps it has already come, when the world you have lived in your whole life quietly stops fitting, not with a crash, not with thunder, but with a small unbearable silence, the silence that falls after a party has ended and everyone has gone home, and you are left standing in a room full of empty glasses, wondering why you feel more alone in a crowd than you ever did by yourself. If you have felt that, if you have wept for no reason in your car in a parking lot, if you have walked out of a room because the air itself felt heavy, if you have known a stranger's grief before they spoke a word of it, then what I am about to say is not a theory to you. It is a memory. It is a confession. It is your own biography, spoken back to you in a voice you have been waiting your whole life to hear. Let us begin, then, not with comfort, but with truth. Because comfort lies, and truth, however strange it first appears, will always set you free. I have spent my life studying the soul, not the soul as the churches describe it, sealed and finished and known, but the soul as it actually behaves, restless, contradictory, symbolic, alive. And in that study, I came to know a particular kind of person, a rare and burdened and extraordinary kind of person, whom the modern world has taken to calling an empath. I do not love the word. Words are always too small for what they try to hold, but I understand what it points toward. It points toward a psyche so permeable, so poorly defended, so deeply wired into the currents of feeling that move beneath all human life, that such a person cannot simply live among others the way most people live. They absorb, they register, they carry, and for years, sometimes for decades, they do this without knowing it is happening, mistaking the world's sorrow for their own, mistaking another's rage for a flaw in their own character, wondering why they are so tired, so tender, so strangely unbearably aware. And then the awakening begins. It rarely announces itself with a fanfare. It arrives more often as a kind of falling apart. A season of losses, a friendship that suddenly feels unbearable, a job that once fit like a second skin now feels like a costume 2 sizes too small, a grief that comes from nowhere and empties out into everything. This is not breakdown for its own sake. This is the unconscious doing what the unconscious has always done since the first human being lay down under the first night sky and wondered what he was for. It is compensating. It is correcting a life that has drifted too far from its center. It is calling the person home to themselves. And the empath, more than almost anyone, feels this call not as an idea, but as a body-shaking event, because they have spent a lifetime living in other people's weather instead of their own. What follows, when this awakening truly begins, looks strange to the outside world. It looks strange even to the one living it. Let us walk through these strange behaviors together, slowly, honestly, the way one walks through a house at night with a single candle, not rushing past any room, but pausing in each one long enough to see what is actually there. The first strange behavior is this: a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion in the presence of other people, even people they love. You will notice it first as confusion. You go to the family gathering, the one you have attended every year of your life, and within an hour your body feels as though it has run a great distance. Your eyes ache, your thoughts scatter. You find yourself counting the minutes until you can leave, and then hating yourself for counting them, because these are your people, this is your family. Why does love feel so heavy all of a sudden? I will tell you why. Before the awakening, you absorbed the emotional atmosphere of a room the way a sponge absorbs water, quietly, automatically, without registering the weight, because you had never known what it felt like to be dry. But the awakening changes the nervous system's relationship to feeling. The senses sharpen. The old numbness, which was never peace, but only exhaustion, wearing peace's clothing, begins to lift. And what rushes in to fill that space is everything you were never taught to filter. The unspoken resentment between your parents, the grief your brother has never named, the fear beneath your friend's laughter. You are not becoming weaker. You are becoming conscious of a burden you have carried since childhood, without ever once being permitted to put it down. This is why the empath in awakening begins quite suddenly to need solitude the way the body needs water, not as a luxury, as survival. And this frightens the people around them because it looks like withdrawal, like coldness, like the person they knew is disappearing. But nothing is disappearing. Something is being born, and everything that is born requires for a time the darkness of the womb. The second strange behavior is weeping, sudden, unexplained, and to the rational mind, deeply embarrassing weeping, tears in the grocery store, tears at a stranger's kindness, tears during a film that would not have moved you a year ago, and tears, most disturbingly of all, that arrive with no apparent cause whatsoever, simply rising up out of the body like water, finding a crack in old stone. The awakening empath often believes something is wrong with them in these moments. I promise you, nothing is wrong. What is happening is that decades of unfelt feeling, your own and the feelings you carried on behalf of others, without knowing they were not yours, are finally being permitted passage. The tears are not breaking you. The tears are the proof that the dam has begun at last to release what it was never built to hold forever. A person who weeps easily in this season of their life is not fragile, they are thawing. And what has been frozen the longest always takes the longest and the strangest forms to melt. The third strange behavior is an almost violent intolerance for falseness. This one confuses everyone, including the empath themselves, because for most of their life they were the peacemaker, the accommodator, the one who could get along with anyone. And then, quite suddenly, they find they cannot sit through small talk without wanting to scream. They cannot smile politely at the office gossip. They cannot pretend to admire an achievement that was built on someone else's back. Friendships that were built on convenience rather than truth begin one by one, to fall away, not because the empath pushes them away, but because the empath can no longer perform the version of themselves those friendships required. This is not bitterness. This is discernment finally waking up after a long sleep. The psyche, once it begins its return to wholeness, develops an almost animal sense for what is real and what is theater, and it will no longer consent to spend its limited hours in rooms full of masks. If people you have known for years begin to feel like strangers, do not panic. It may simply mean you are finally becoming someone real enough to require real company. The fourth strange behavior belongs to the night. The dreams change. They become vivid, symbolic, sometimes frightening, often prophetic in a way that unsettles the waking mind. You dream of drowning and wake gasping. You dream of a house with rooms you never knew existed, and in the dream you wander from door to door with a growing, aching sense that something important is behind one of them. If only you could find the key. You dream of the dead, and they speak to you as though no time has passed at all. This is the unconscious, no longer content to whisper, beginning instead to speak in the only language it has ever truly known, the language of image and symbol, the oldest language there is, older than any word ever spoken aloud. The empath in awakening should not fear these dreams, nor dismiss them as noise. They should write them down. They should sit with them the way one sits with an old friend who has finally worked up the courage to tell a difficult truth. The dream is not trying to disturb you. The dream is trying to reach you because during your waking hours you have so often been listening to everyone but yourself. Alongside the dreams comes the fifth strange behavior, an intensification of synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences that defy tidy explanation. The song that plays at the exact moment you needed to hear its words. The stranger who says, unprompted, the very sentence you needed to hear that day. The number that keeps appearing, the name that keeps arising, the sense that the world itself has begun very quietly to answer you. Skeptics will tell you this is only the mind's hunger for pattern. I have studied this phenomenon for the whole of my working life, and I will tell you something different. When a person's inner life and outer life begin to move in visible relationship to one another, it is a sign that they are aligning, however imperfectly, with something larger than the small, defended self. Call it the self. Call it the deep order of things. Call it what you like. The name matters less than the experience. And the experience for the empath in awakening becomes undeniable because they have always been more porous to the unseen currents of life than most, and now those currents are finally visible to them in daylight. The sixth strange behavior is a heightened, sometimes agonizing sensitivity to environment itself, to noise, to light, to crowded rooms, to the emotional residue that seems to cling to certain places the way smoke clings to old curtains. A supermarket becomes unbearable. A hospital waiting room feels like drowning. Certain people's homes feel welcoming, and others, for reasons that cannot be named, feel wrong, though nothing wrong has been said or done within their walls. This is not superstition. It is the natural consequence of a nervous system that has stopped filtering and started perceiving. What was once background noise becomes foreground information. And though it is exhausting, though it will require the empath to build, for the first time in their life, real boundaries around their body and their time, it is also quietly a gift, because a person who can feel a room this precisely can also eventually learn to feel their own truth with the same precision. And that is a skill most people spend a lifetime never acquiring. The seventh strange behavior is the crumbling of the persona, the professional mask, the family role, the identity built for the approval of others rather than the truth of the self. This is often the most frightening part of the awakening, because it can look from the outside like a person losing themselves. The career that once defined them no longer fits. The role of the strong one, the fixer, the good daughter, the reliable friend, the role they built brick by careful brick over decades, begins to feel like a costume worn too long, chafing at the seams. They may quit the job, they may end the relationship, they may go quiet in ways that alarm the people who relied on their performance of steadiness. I want to say this as clearly as I can. This is not collapse. This is the oldest pattern the human psyche knows. The old structure must be dismantled before the true structure can be built. No cathedral was ever raised on a foundation that was never properly cleared. The empath who feels their old self dying is not going mad. They are undergoing the most necessary death a human being can experience, the death of who they pretended to be, so that who they actually are may finally step into the light. The eighth strange behavior is a growing difficulty distinguishing their own emotions from the emotions of others for a time. And I will not pretend this time is short, for it is not. The empath in awakening may feel more confused than ever about what belongs to them. They walk into a room feeling fine and walk out feeling despair and cannot say why. They wake anxious for no reason until they remember a friend confided a fear to them the night before. This confusion is not a step backward. It is the necessary middle of the process, the moment before mastery, when the skill is visible but not yet controlled, the way a child learning to read can suddenly see that the marks on the page are letters, and is for a time overwhelmed by how many letters there are, before the day arrives when reading becomes as effortless as breathing. The empath is learning, often for the first time in their life, to ask the simple and revolutionary question, is this feeling mine? And the very fact that they are learning to ask it is proof that the awakening is working exactly as it should. The ninth strange behavior is perhaps the one people fear the most to admit, a sudden, unwelcome intimacy with their own shadow, their buried rage, their long suppressed grief, their jealousy, their unspoken hungers, all the disowned parts of themselves that a lifetime of being the sensitive one, the peacekeeper, the good one, required them to hide even from themselves. This is not a malfunction. I have said this to every soul who ever sat across from me in genuine crisis, and I will say it to you now. There is no light without shadow, and there is no wholeness without the unglamorous, unflattering work of meeting the parts of yourself you have spent your whole life disowning. The empath, who has for years been so exquisitely attuned to the pain of others, is often astonished to discover how much unexamined pain, how much unspoken anger lives inside their own chest. This is not hypocrisy. It is simply what happens when a mirror that has spent its whole life reflecting other people's faces is finally turned around to face its own. It is uncomfortable. It is at times humbling in a way that stings. But I promise you, the parts of yourself you are most afraid to look at are precisely the parts most hungry to be known. And once known, they stop ruling you from the dark and instead become servants of the very wholeness you are seeking. The tenth strange behavior is an intuition that grows sharper by the week, a knowing that arrives before the facts do, a sense of what a person is about to say before they say it, a feeling in the chest before the phone rings with bad news. This unsettles the empath more than almost anything else, because the rational mind, trained by a culture that trusts only what can be measured, does not know what to do with a form of knowledge that arrives without evidence and is again and again proven correct. I will not ask you to believe more than your own experience gives you cause to believe. I will only say this: the unconscious has always known more than the conscious mind is willing to admit, and a person who has spent their whole life feeling the currents beneath other people's words is, in the awakening, simply beginning to trust what they have always quietly known. Now, I have named 10 strange behaviors, and you may have recognized yourself in 3 of them, or 7, or all 10. And if so, I want you to hear this clearly, because it is the whole reason I am speaking to you tonight. None of this is illness. None of this is a breaking. What you are living through has a name older than psychology itself, older than any modern word for the mind. It is called individuation. It is the lifelong process by which a person becomes who they actually are, rather than who they were told to be, or who it was convenient for others that they remain. It is not a straight road. It winds through darkness before it reaches any clearing. It asks you to lose people you thought you could not live without, and to discover on the other side of that loss that you were never as fragile as you feared. It asks you to sit with feelings you have spent a lifetime avoiding, and to discover that feeling them does not destroy you. It is the avoiding that was destroying you, slowly, for years, without your consent. Every culture that has ever taken the inner life seriously has known this pattern and given it a shape. The old stories called it the hero's descent into the underworld, not a punishment, but a necessary passage, the only road that leads to the treasure the hero was seeking all along. The mystics called it the dark night, and insisted, every one of them, that the darkness was not the absence of God, but the very method by which God was drawing closer, too close now for the old comfortable distance to survive. And the alchemists, those strange patient men, bent over their fires for a lifetime, searching for a way to turn lead into gold, knew something that modern life has almost entirely forgotten, that the transformation always begins with what they call the nigrido, the blackening, the stage in which the raw material of the work must first decompose, must first fall apart, before anything of value can be drawn out of it. You are not falling apart because something has gone wrong. You are falling apart because something, at long last, is going right. I want to speak now to the loneliness of this, because I do not want to romanticize a process that is, in its actual daily texture, often very lonely. The people around you may not understand what is happening. They knew a version of you that was easier to be near, quieter, more agreeable, less inclined to notice the things they preferred left unnoticed. When that version of you begins to change, some of them will grieve the person they lost, and some, I am sorry to say, will resent the person you are becoming, because your growth will ask an uncomfortable question of their own stagnation, a question they did not ask to be asked. This is not your fault, and it is not a reason to stop. A tree does not apologize for growing simply because it casts a longer shadow than it once did. It grows because growing is what a living thing does, and the shadow it casts is not a flaw in the tree. It is only what light looks like when it meets something real. I want to say something too about the body, because the mind and the body have never been the separate strangers that certain philosophies have pretended they are. The empath in awakening will often find their body speaking a language of its own, new sensitivities, unexplained fatigue, headaches that arrive with certain company and vanish with certain solitude, a stomach that tightens in rooms where something is being hidden. Do not dismiss this as coincidence, or worse, as hypochondria. The body has always known things before the mind was willing to admit them. Learn to listen to it the way you would learn to listen to a wise, old, blunt friend who has never once flattered you and has therefore never once lied to you either. So let me offer you now not a cure, for there is nothing here that needs curing, but a companionship through it, the kind of companionship I would have wanted in my own long nights of confusion, from someone who had already walked the road ahead of me. First, let solitude be sacred, not shameful. When you feel the pull to withdraw, do not apologize for it to anyone, least of all to yourself. The person who cannot bear to be alone with themselves has usually built a self not worth being alone with, and that is not you, not anymore. Solitude, for the awakening empath, is not avoidance. It is the workshop in which the real work gets done. Second, write down your dreams, your sudden tears, your strange knowings, without editing them for plausibility. The unconscious does not speak in tidy sentences, and you insult it when you demand that it explain itself before you will listen. Let it speak in fragments. Let it speak in images that make no sense at first. Understanding, when it comes, will come slowly, the way dawn comes, not all at once, but by degrees, until one day you look up and realize the whole sky has changed color, while you were not watching closely enough to catch the exact moment it happened. Third, build boundaries the way you would build a home, not as a wall against the world, but as a structure that lets you finally live inside your own life, instead of camping permanently in everyone else's. This will feel, at first, like selfishness, because you have spent so long defining love as self-erasure. It is not selfishness. A well cannot give water to anyone once it has run dry, and you have been giving from an empty well for longer than you know. Fourth, go toward your shadow rather than away from it. The anger you have never let yourself feel, the grief you postponed because there was never a convenient time to feel it, the envy you were ashamed of, go toward these gently, the way you would approach a frightened animal, not to punish it, but to finally, after so many years, let it know it is safe enough to come out of hiding. What is integrated stops ruling you. What is exiled rules you forever, precisely because you have refused to look at it. Fifth, trust the intuition that is sharpening in you, even when it cannot yet explain itself in the language the world demands. You do not owe every knowing a footnote. Some truths arrive whole, long before the evidence catches up to confirm them, and a person who waits for permission from the rational mind before trusting their own depths will wait, very often, until the moment for trusting has already passed. Sixth, and perhaps hardest of all, let the people who cannot make this journey with you go, with grief, if grief is what arises, but without guilt. You are not abandoning them. You are simply no longer available to be someone you were never truly meant to be. Some relationships were built for the old you, and they will not survive the new one. And this is not tragedy. This is simply what happens when a river finds, after years of being dammed, its actual course. Now I want to close where I began, with the strangeness itself, because I do not want you to leave this thinking the strangeness will ever fully disappear. It will not. And this is the final truth I want to leave with you, the one I believe with the whole of what I have spent my life learning. The strangeness is not a phase to be endured on the way to some calmer, more ordinary life waiting on the other side. The strangeness is the sign of life itself, finally awake, finally paying attention, finally alive to a depth that most people spend their entire existence carefully, politely, tragically avoiding. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were simply too much for a world that had trained itself to want too little. The tears that come without warning, the exhaustion in crowded rooms, the dreams that will not let you sleep in peace until you have listened to them, the sudden inability to sit through a single more conversation that isn't real. None of this is malfunction. This is your own soul, finally loud enough to be heard over the noise of a lifetime spent listening to everyone but yourself, There is an old idea, older than any single thinker, that every human life is meant to become whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole, all its scattered pieces finally gathered under one roof, the light and the dark both welcomed home. Most people never begin this journey, not because they are incapable, but because the noise of ordinary life is loud enough, comfortable enough, to drown out the quiet, insistent knocking of their own depths for an entire lifetime. You do not have that luxury anymore, and I want you to understand that this is not a curse. It is, whatever it costs you, the rarest kind of fortune. You have been chosen by your own nature, if nothing else, to feel what others have trained themselves not to feel, and to therefore know what others may live and die without ever glimpsing. So when the strangeness comes again, and it will come again tomorrow or tonight, in the middle of some ordinary moment that suddenly cracks open into something larger than itself, do not ask what is wrong with you. Ask, instead, what is trying to be born. Ask what part of yourself has waited long enough in the dark and has finally decided that the waiting is over. You are not losing your mind. You are, for the first time, in longer than you can remember, finding it, finding the mind and the heart and the soul that were always yours, buried beneath everyone else's noise, waiting with more patience than you ever gave yourself credit for, to finally be heard. Walk toward the strangeness, then, instead of away from it. Let the tears fall when they come, without apology. Let the old friendships that were never truly seeing you fall away, without bitterness and without chasing after what has already quietly ended. Let the dreams speak, and listen the way you would listen to the one person in your life who has never once lied to you. Let the solitude do its slow, invisible work, the way winter does its work on a field that will, in its own season, and not one day before, come green again. You are not falling apart. You are coming together for the first time as the person you were always meant to become. And I promise you, on the far side of this strange and difficult and holy unraveling, there is a wholeness waiting for you that no ordinary, untroubled life could ever have given you the depth to hold. Go gently, go slowly, but go. The awakening does not ask you to arrive anywhere by morning. It only asks that you keep walking, one strange and honest step at a time, toward the self you have spent your whole life waiting, without knowing it, to finally meet.